Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we aren't just analyzing a book today, we are grabbing a live wire with both hands.
We really are. It is a heavy one.
If you are a man looking around at the modern world right now, maybe at your workplace or the family courts or the dating market, and you have this gnawing feeling that the game is rigged against you.
Or that the rule book was rewritten in a language you were never taught.
Exactly. If you feel that way, this conversation is for you. We are peeling back the layers of the Matrix today. But right up front, before we descend into this rabbit hole, I need you to do one thing. Hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Seriously, take a second and do it.
The algorithm generally tries to bury this kind of information. It actively hates what we're about to discuss, so help us keep the signal strong.
And it is definitely a heavy hitter today. We are looking at a text that essentially functions as a diagnostic manual for what the author calls the systemic collapse of Western institutions.
Right. We are diving into the controversial, very dense, and frankly explosive ebook by Conrad Riker. The title alone is a mouthful, but it sets the tone perfectly. It's called Amoral Women Killing Billions of Babies Without Contrition, Shamelessness, Covert Relational Violence, and Pussy Pass Impunity.
It is quite the title.
It is. But putting the title aside, Riker describes this text not as standard nonfiction, but as a weapon of clarity and rearmament. It is ultra long, it's incisive, and it covers everything from economics to evolutionary psychology.
And just a quick reminder for you listening, as always, our mission on this deep dive is to impartially report on the contents of the sources we examine.
Right, we are not taking sides.
We are not endorsing any specific political viewpoints here, left or right. Our job is just to map out the ideas contained in the original source material so you can understand the arguments being made out there.
Absolutely. We are just breaking down the claims. And if you want to follow along, and honestly, you might want to check the receipts on this one because the data he presents is incredibly dense. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and grab a copy. You really need the full text to get the scope of this argument.
So the mission for today's deep dive is to unpack Riker's central thesis. He argues that the decline of the West isn't an accident, and it is not just about bad economics or corrupt politicians in the traditional sense.
Right.
Riker posits that civilization has been captured by a specific force. He calls it female-driven ideology, and he identifies a mechanism he terms maternal mimicry.
Let's start right there. Maternal mimicry. It sounds biological, almost clinical. What exactly does Riker mean by that in a political or institutional context?
Well, he is arguing that the state itself has undergone a fundamental transformation. If you look back at the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminists and Marxists, according to the book, the state was essentially a patriarchal structure. It was designed for justice, infrastructure, defense, efficiency. It was about hard borders, hard rules, and meritocracy. Riker argues that it has morphed into a massive bureaucratic daycare.
A daycare run by what he calls the repressed maternal instinct of women in power.
Precisely. Because this instinct is projected onto the state, the government no longer treats citizens, specifically men, as adults with rights. It treats them as children who need to be managed, scolded, and kept quote-unquote safe at the cost of their liberty.
So the logic here is that the government has moved from a father archetype, which is strict, capable, and demands competence, to a mother archetype that is nurturing, but ultimately suffocating.
That is exactly the distinction he makes. It is the difference between a state that ensures you have the freedom to succeed or fail, and a state that ensures you never get hurt, even if it means you aren't free. And he brings some wild examples to back this up.
I remember this from the reading.
Yeah, the chapter titled Infrastructure of Emotion, he cites a directive from Transport Canada. They actually require reports on how new bridges impact gender-based trauma.
Wait, hold on. We are talking about concrete and steel here. We are talking about...
Load-bearing structures.
Yeah, load-bearing structures. How on earth does a bridge cause gender-based trauma?
That is the exact point Riker is making. It sounds like pure satire. But he points out this is literal policy. Civil servants are writing reports asking if concrete beams might trigger PTSD or exclude certain identities.
Wow.
It highlights his core argument. When you prioritize emotional safety over structural integrity, you get absurdity. But it is a dangerous absurdity. Riker argues this safetyism trap has fundamentally replaced liberty.
He uses Sweden as a prime case study for this, right?
He does. And Sweden is usually praised in the mainstream media for its equality and happiness index.
Right, the Scandinavian model. Everyone says it's the utopia we should strive for.
But Riker takes a very different view of the data. He notes that Sweden spends approximately $1.2 billion annually on gender equality agencies. That is a massive amount of capital. Yet since 1980, male suicide rates there have risen 100%.
That is just a staggering statistic. So the state is spending over $1 billion to make things equal and safe, but men are checking out of existence at record rates.
According to Riker, that is a feature, not a bug. The system prioritizes female emotional comfort. If the environment is perfectly safe for the maternal archetype, it is often incredibly suffocating for the masculine archetype.
He also mentions Finland in that section.
Yes, where the government spends millions training men to name their feelings. It is an attempt to medicate masculinity, treating stoicism as a pathology. The state basically views men as defective women or emotional infants who just need to be taught to cry so they fit neatly into the daycare.
It is the complete pathologizing of normal male behavior. They want to turn men into women because that is the only operating system the maternal state actually understands.
Exactly.
But let's look at how this control is actually enforced on the ground. It is one thing for a government to issue bizarre guidelines about bridges, but it's another thing entirely to feel it in your daily life, like in the office.
Right, the day-to-day enforcement.
Riker talks about a mechanism he calls the GSR pattern. This seems totally central to his theory on social control.
It is. It is the critical concept for understanding the workplace dynamics Riker describes. GSR stands for gossip, shame, and rally. Riker identifies this as the primary enforcement mechanism of the female hive mind within modern institutions.
Break that down for us. How does that GSR cycle actually work in practice?
Well, it starts with gossip. And he notes this isn't just idle chatter at the water cooler. It is information gathering and consensus building behind the scenes.
Establishing the narrative.
Exactly. Then comes shame. This is marking the target as morally deficient or creepy or unsafe. Finally, the rally. This is when the group mobilizes to completely expel the target.
I think we have all seen this in action. The book describes the whisper network. You know the scenario, the bad vibes firing. A man loses his job not because he didn't hit his numbers, not because he was incompetent. I mean, he could be the top earner in the whole department, but because a colleague whispered that he made her uncomfortable.
And Riker argues this is where HR becomes the enforcer of the hive mind. He cites a Stanford study claiming women spread rumors 7 times faster than men. But here is the nuance we need to capture. Riker emphasizes that this isn't necessarily malicious and unconscious villainous sense. He calls it amoral prioritization.
Amoral. That implies they don't see it as right or wrong.
Correct. Riker posits that this is deeply biological. The goal isn't objective truth. The goal is social cohesion and consensus. If a man threatens the emotional equilibrium of the group, even just by being too competent, too direct, or too male, the hive rallies to remove him.
Because truth is secondary to the feeling of safety.
Exactly. The group feeling good is vastly more important to this system than the individual being right.
That is terrifying when you think about it, because you can't defend yourself against a vibe. You can defend against a fact, a bad sales quarter, a specific documented action, but you cannot defend against someone else's internal feeling. It is literally like fighting a ghost.
That is the crux of his argument. And Riker extends this analysis from the corporate office straight into the courtroom. He calls it the gynocracy of law.
Right.
He claims we see a distinct legal double standard where female emotion is treated as a mitigating factor, while male aggression is strictly criminalized.
The PMS defense was the example that really stuck with me from that chapter. The book lists actual cases where it has been used successfully in court to reduce sentences for violent crimes.
Yes, the core legal argument being, my hormones made me do it. Riker asks the obvious counter question here. If a man blamed high testosterone for punching someone in a bar, would that be a mitigating factor?
Absolutely not. They would lock him up and throw away the key. The judge would see it as an aggravating factor. They'd say he's a biological danger to society.
Precisely. It creates a two-tiered justice system. But nowhere is this more prevalent than in the family courts, which Riker describes as a maternal monopoly. The stats he presents in the book are just brutal. Women initiate 73% of divorces, yet they receive custody in 80% of cases.
There was that story in the book of the father in Florida. He was arrested for kidnapping his own child because the mother forgot to update the school records.
That story is incredibly visceral. He picks up his son from school, which is something any father should be able to do, and suddenly he is in handcuffs. Riker uses this to demonstrate that the default assumption of the state is that the father is a threat until proven otherwise.
The mother is the default guardian, and the father is basically a conditional accessory.
Right. And this leads to one of the most interesting theoretical frameworks in the entire book. the state as a proxy womb.
I wanted to get into that. Can you explain the mechanics of the proxy womb?
It is an economic and sociological argument. Riker argues the modern welfare state has effectively replaced the husband. Historically, a woman relied on a husband for resources, shelter, and protection. Now, the state extracts resources from men via taxes and redistributes them to women via welfare, grants, affirmative action, and massive social programs.
So it allows women to completely bypass reliance on individual men.
Yes, while remaining entirely dependent on the collective of men. Riker argues this facilitates the systemic erasure of fathers. You don't need a dad in the house if the government check clears every single month. The state becomes the provider, and the biological father becomes merely a sperm donor and a tax source.
And the cost of that erasure is very measurable. Riker isn't just theorizing in a vacuum here, he points to the actual societal outcomes. The book notes that boys raised without fathers are 5 times more likely to end up in prison.
A huge statistical jump.
Right, yet we have institutions actively pushing fathers out of the picture. Riker mentions a school in Portland that banned fathers from attending parent-teacher conferences unless they were escorted by the mother.
It is the institutionalization of the idea that men are dangerous by default. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, Riker argues this dynamic completely destroys meritocracy. When you prioritize safety, feelings, and inclusion over the lack competence, systems inevitably fail.
He calls it the death of merit. The book tells the story of an Intel engineer that perfectly illustrates this.
Oh yeah, the software guy.
Right, this guy delivered 0 bug code, way ahead of schedule, absolute rock star performance. In a sane, merit-based world, he gets the promotion and a massive bonus. But he was passed over. And why? Because he didn't make people feel safe. He was too direct in meetings. He didn't use the right soft language.
Riker calls this the triumph of social skills over technical skills. And he traces the origin of this mindset directly to the universities, which he labels the feminist factory.
That's a great term.
He argues modern universities function less as educational institutions and much more as indoctrination camps. He highlights university seminars with titles like Men or Trauma, and he documents the systematic purging of male professors who dare to cite basic biological facts in their lectures.
It creates an environment where competence is entirely secondary to ideological conformity. If you are amazing at your job, but you are bad at the ideology, you are out.
Exactly.
And this bleeds directly into the broader economy. This part is fascinating. Riker calls it the financial parasite dynamic.
This is where the macroeconomic numbers get really interesting. According to the data in the book, women control roughly 83% of consumer spending in the U.S. But as a demographic group, they are net tax receivers. Riker introduces the concept of the consumption ceiling to explain this.
Explain that for the listener. The consumption ceiling.
It is the point where spending on status, self-care, and lifestyle inflation exceeds actual productive output. Riker argues that the modern economy is geared entirely toward female consumption patterns.
Fast fashion, cosmetics, wellness retreats, travel.
Right, all of it funded by debt and male productivity. He claims we are spending the future to pay for present emotional comfort, leading to what he calls civilizational debt. We are eroding the hard capital base of the civilization to fund a massive, emotionally driven shopping spree.
And the media, according to Riker, completely covers this up. He calls it the media matriarchy.
He argues they create an artificial hierarchy of victims. He contrasts the wall-to-wall international coverage of the Gabby Petito case, which was tragic, obviously, with the fact that 19 men died in workplace and car accidents that exact same weekend, and nobody heard a single peep about it.
Because it reinforces the narrative. Female suffering is a national tragedy. Male suffering is just a background statistic.
Correct. And this creates a continuous feedback loop where financial and emotional resources are constantly diverted to female issues, while male issues remain entirely invisible.
Speaking of invisible, or perhaps being too visible, let's talk about the war on beauty. This section was really surprising because it deals with the male gaze. Riker discusses how simply looking has been essentially criminalized.
He uses the story of a Toronto photographer who was arrested for voyeurism just for taking artistic photos in a public park. Riker points out the massive paradox here. Women optimize for visibility. Fashion, makeup, Instagram, TikTok, it is all about being seen. But the system severely punishes men for looking without explicit, revocable permission. Riker says it is entirely about the control of the interaction.
But there's a flip side to this control, isn't there? Riker argues that the system doesn't actually make women happy in the long run. He dedicates a whole section to the loneliness epidemic.
This is the chapter he calls The Wall. Riker paints a very stark picture of women in their 40s who prioritize their careers and the boss babe identity. They bought into the narrative that men are unnecessary, and now they face profound regret. He mentions the sudden, massive demand for state-funded IVF as the final, desperate attempt to cheat biology.
He links this to the concept of the identity carousel, doesn't he?
Or the mirror self, yes. He argues that because of the GSR mechanism we talked about, the constant need for social consensus, many modern women lack a stable internal core.
They just reflect their environment.
Exactly. They change political views and personality traits based on their current partner or whatever the latest social trend happens to be. When the external attention fades or the trend shifts, the loneliness sets in because there is no foundational self to fall back on.
So let's take a step back and look at the whole board here. We have a capture of the state by maternal mimicry. We have the death of merit in the corporate workplace. We have the erasure of fathers in the home, and an economic system running completely on civilizational debt.
It sounds incredibly bleak when you lay it out like that.
It does, but Riker doesn't just leave us in the wreckage. He has a prescribed solution for the men reading this: detachment and rebuilding.
This is really the red pill moment of the book. Riker argues that trying to fix the system from within is functionally impossible because the system is specifically designed to identify and expel you.
That is the GSR at work.
Right. So the only viable solution is what he calls New Carthage.
I love that imagery. New Carthage. It implies leaving Rome and building something totally new, completely separate from the crumbling empire.
Exactly. It is about men forming their own tribes, building parallel networks, and physically reconnecting with the real world. He cites an amazing study showing that men who spend time in nature have 27% higher sperm counts.
Which proves it is about biological restoration as much as psychological.
It is about building parallel institutions from the ground up that explicitly value merit, logic, and strength.
And reclaiming the mind. He calls for a return to the trivium. For those who don't know, that is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the classical tools of critical thinking.
He views the Western canon and objective logic as the ultimate weapons against emotional tyranny. If the corrupt system runs on vibes and feelings, your best defense is cold logic and stoicism. He contrasts this sharply with modern feminist self-help. Riker points to the Clean Your Room movement popularized by Jordan Peterson.
Right, simple, highly actionable advice.
And highly effective. Riker shows how it led to measurable increases in male graduation rates because it was based on constructive action and personal responsibility, not systemic grievance.
It really works.
Riker's core message is that the West isn't dying from weakness. It is dying from a systemic betrayal by this feral maternal instinct. The only solution is for men to wake up, fully detach from the matrix of validation seeking, and rebuild on their own terms.
That is a remarkably powerful call to action. It shifts the listener's focus entirely from how do I please this broken system to how do I build my own system.
And historically, that is the most dangerous idea to any current status quo.
Honestly, we have barely scratched the surface of the red pills contained in this book. We didn't even get to the chapters on the jealousy engine or the abortion archetype, and there's so much more technical detail on how these institutional mechanisms actually work. You really need to read the whole thing to get the full diagnosis.
You really do.
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Amoral Women Killing Billions of Babies Without Contrition, Shamelessness, Covert Relational Violence, and Pussy Pass Impunity by Conrad Riker. Yes, it is a very long title, but it is an absolute must-read for anyone trying to navigate this landscape.
And for those of you who want to stay plugged into this counter-revolution, you can follow the author directly.
Yes, definitely follow him at Conrad Riker on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube. Get in the comments, read his essays, join the community of guys figuring this out.
I think the final takeaway here, the thought I want to leave you with, is that awareness really is the first step. Once you see the pattern, once you understand the GSR and maternal mimicry happening in your office or your local government, you simply cannot unsee it. And that clarity, above all else, is your best weapon moving forward.
Absolutely well said. The systemic betrayal relies on your ignorance, so waking up is step one. If you got value from this deep dive today, help the algorithm find more awake men. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a review. It really helps us out. We will see you on the next one.